Please be seated. Well, today, I have chosen not to duck a bullet presented to me in the Scriptures and to tackle a very sensitive topic. It's one that touches on us all, touches us in the most painful and deep ways possible. So I beg your mercy and pardon if I misstep in this emotional minefield. But I really think it would be unfaithful of me not to attempt to essay my way through these treacherous waters, given some of what has gone on and experienced by our congregation of late. Draw close to God, and He will draw close to you. That's what the Epistle of James tells us today. Now, if you're in this building hearing this message, chances are that you want to be close to God. You'd like to be. So why does God so often seem far away? To be sure, the distractions of this world can obscure His voice, and probably more often than not, when it seems that He is far away, it's because it is we that have moved. We also reach out to God precisely when things are bad. There are no atheists in foxholes, goes the old saying. Yet it's also true that much of our suffering is, in this life, self-imposed, self-inflicted. And we do not even take the steps we could take to alleviate it, asking instead for God to deliver us out of our overextended debt, our failed relationships, the ill health caused by our diet or lack of exercise, and other circumstances that are really nothing more than the natural consequence of the choices we have made. Those aren't the kind of things I'm interested in talking about this morning. I'm not going to be lecturing you or moralizing with you this morning. This morning I want to talk about the kind of suffering and isolation from God we endure that is undeserved and unasked for. Most of us can think of a time when we wanted desperately some sign from God and did not receive it. Sometimes God seems far away because of an unanswered prayer or one not answered as we would wish. As I stand here this morning and reflect on the last few weeks of ministry here, it seems like sin, death, and the devil have been working overtime in our congregation lately. There's a lot of pain. As I stand here, two clergy friends kneel and pray at the bedside of family members, one a young wife, and one a child just entering manhood. Family members who seem, by all indications, to be taking the last steps of their earthly pilgrimages. Some suffering is not self-imposed. And from that, we rightly cry out to God for deliverance. So why in such moments does God often seem so far away or even non-existent? The first answer we have from the Scriptures to that question, and from some of the greatest theologians the church has ever produced, people who seem to have had an extraordinarily intimate connection with God, is that God cannot be perceived clearly by us because we are fallen creatures. Our current spiritual state keeps us from perceiving God. If you want to say our spiritual organ for perceiving God. You've got eyes to see and ears to hear and nose to smell. Our spiritual organ of perceiving God is diseased and must be cured before we will be able to perceive more than the merest hints and glimpses of God. Now, what this wound to our souls means is that in our current state, we are incapable of truly and deeply interacting with God. You See, encountering God is not like encountering a really big, really powerful version of us. God is utterly different from us, even though we're made in His image. Buddhists have a prayer, they say, for the spirits of the insects that they inadvertently trample under their feet as they walk each day. God is more different from us than we are from the ants we walk over. And were we to fully encounter Him as we are now, we would be inadvertently crushed by Him. In our current state, for God to reveal Himself to us would be for Him to destroy us. Indeed, that is what we call the judgment of God, is at least in part simply us encountering Him when we are unfit and incapable of communion with Him. How do we know that we are so unfit and incapable? Is it just that we are bad and He is good? No. God can and does forgive sins. No, the proof of our spiritual distance from God is at least in part that we reject suffering. I don't suffer well, one congregation confessed to me recently. Which of us do, I wondered, as I kind of marveled at his honesty. See, we want God to come in glory and wisdom and power. We want God to wipe out the enemy, as the psalm just said, and leave the battlefield clear for us. I mean, we can accept a little light lifting to strengthen ourselves, but heavy lifting involving real pain, no, we'd like that to be His job. Put plainly, we reject the cross. We reject the cross not when it's over and done with, but when it is a present reality. I mean, for God to suffer for us in 33 AD is fine. But please let that be it. We do not want God's suffering to be a present reality. A reality we must draw close to and indeed be drawn into if we would draw close to Him. Popular Christian personalities proclaim that Jesus went to the cross so you could live a victorious life. Have your best life now. Now, there is no doubt that that kind of message is going to pack stadiums and sell books and bring in lucrative television contracts, because it is exactly what we in our fallen condition wish to hear. Unfortunately, it does not square with what history teaches us about truly holy people, does it? People like Mother Teresa, who suffered for decades in spiritual silence, enduring a sense of God's absence as she ministered to the poorest of the poor in His name. Nor does it square with Jesus' own words to us in last week's gospel reading, where He said, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." To get close to God means to embrace the cross. His cross, first and foremost, and our cross next. To draw close to God means to embrace suffering, and that is unbelievably hard for us to do in our current condition. And I speak as the first of sinners here. I twisted my back last week. Monday morning, I'm making the phone call to the chiropractor. We do not want to suffer. And we especially do not want to see those we love suffer. But if we draw close to God, we will feel the pain of the world as He does. We will suffer. For if we feel crushed when too many bad things happen to us at one time, when we and those we love are suffering, what must God experience, who knows firsthand the pain of every individual on the face of the earth? If I feel crushed by the suffering of my child, What does God feel? Who's watching simultaneously the suffering of my child and the suffering of the little girl huddling in the corner of her tent in Africa as the shock troops level her village. And the child in India dying of starvation that maybe I would have had the chance to alleviate. If I suffer from chronic pain, what does God suffer? Who feels intimately not only my pain, but the pain of my friend who broke her neck in a car accident a couple of years ago and couldn't hold her newborn. The pain of a soldier who lost a limb in a war he did not choose. And the pain of the person slowly being ground down by that wasting disease that's racking their body. Worse yet, if I suffer watching a friend or my child make poor choices, just self-destructive choices, could I stand the suffering of knowing, as God surely does, how I contributed to those choices through my poor counsel or my poor parenting or my failure in a critical moment to do the hard but right thing? God feels the piercings of every illness. He knows the pain and destructiveness of every sin. We are, from the moment we enter this world, dying. And in such a state, the God who is the very source of all life must be obscure to us. Which is why he must reveal himself to us. He must reveal that the one on the cross, the one suffering for us and with us, is him. In Jesus, God reveals himself through the cross as the suffering God, as truly Emmanuel, truly God with us in our suffering. God needed to reveal this to us because we wouldn't believe it any other way. He revealed it when he raised Jesus from the dead, that the suffering was him. See, we did not invent this story about God because we would not invent it. We needed to be told who God really is. And God has told us. And in Jesus, God suffers yet. His hands are still pierced. His brow is still bleeding. He is with us in our suffering. And we are never closer to God than when we suffer. Many of us have heard the well-known poem by Mary Stevenson called Footprints in the Sand. If you know it, it goes, if you don't know it, it goes like this. It's very short. She writes, "One night I dreamed I was walking along the beach with the Lord. Many scenes from my life flashed across the sky. In each scene I noticed footprints in the sand. Sometimes there were 2 sets of footprints, other times there were 1 set of footprints. This bothered me, because I noticed that during the low periods of my life when I was suffering from anguish, sorrow, or defeat, I could see only 1 set of footprints. So I said to the Lord, 'You promised me, Lord, that if I followed you, you would walk with me always. But I have noticed that during the most trying periods of my life, there have only been 1 set of footprints in the sand. Why, when I needed you most, have you not been there for me?' The Lord replied, 'The times when you have seen only 1 set of footprints is when I carried you.'" It's a beautiful sentiment. And judging by the frequency that I see this poem adorning the walls of homes and nursing homes and even, what do you call those things? Cubicles in offices, it must resonate with the experiences of a lot of people. But there's one thing I've always found a little weird about the poem. I have to be honest. And it's quite likely a spiritual failing of my own. But I don't think I would be surprised looking at that beach to see only 1 set of footprints at the times when I was most alone or suffering anguish, sorrow, or defeat, because those are the times I often feel most alone, most bereft of God's support and love and presence. Don't get me wrong, I believe the poem is right. During the most trying periods of our lives, the Lord does carry us. But when we are that close to Him, so close that He is holding us to His bosom and carrying us, I believe we cannot often perceive Him outside of us because we are living in Him. We are so close to Him that we are seeing the world the way He sees it, experiencing its pain as He does, and suffering as He suffers when any of His beloved children suffers. Christians know God as one who has revealed Himself to be a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. That's the prophecy. He is the God who embraces the cross as the path of holiness. And He exhorts us to do the same. From a worldly perspective, from the perspective of our fallen nature, it is a foolish path. By the resurrection of Jesus, God has revealed it as the path to Him. So if we would draw near to God, we must walk in the way He was revealed to be the true one. We must walk in the way of the cross. Paul was right when he said the message about the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. Christianity should not be believed. Should not be believed because it is pleasant or helpful. It is oftentimes neither. It should be believed because it is true. It has been certified by the resurrection of Jesus as being true. It has been revealed by God as being true. So when we suffer unjustly, we are right to cry out to God for deliverance. And He has delivered us through His own blood shed from the cross. But along with that, along with the redemptive role of suffering, God reveals one more fact about suffering, and that is that it is temporary. Easter morning always follows Good Friday, and the power of God is ultimately greater than the power of any grave. In the end, a new heavens and a new earth will replace this broken one, and He will, as the prophecy says, wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain. For the old order of things has passed away. It's right near the end of the book of Revelation. I do not know, honestly, whether the colleagues I mentioned at the beginning of this sermon can feel God's presence as they watch their loved ones suffer. I do not know whether you struggle with a sense of God's absence when things are bad. But I do know this. When you suffer, you are closer to God than ever. And God has promised that your suffering will not last forever. He has revealed to us that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory about to be revealed to us. And He has guaranteed that promise by the resurrection of His own Son from the grave. To Him who is the author of our salvation and the end of all our suffering, be the glory now and forever. Amen.